The iconic rail viaducts between Flinders Street and Spencer Street stations transformed the way that trains operated in Melbourne. First opened in 1891, they allowed services to continue through the city rather than terminate and reverse back the way they came. Even today, after hundreds of years of changes, almost all metropolitan trains run between Flinders Street and Spencer Street, today called Southern Cross. But what if, in an alternative universe, this wasn't the case? What if a project for brand new track was built, allowing trains to operate without having to go through here? Well, in this video, in my mini-series on lesser-known unbuilt railways in Melbourne, we're going to talk about the largely forgotten North-South Rail Link. Just a note before we get started that this one is a bit light on in details because there's very little material available, so please bear with me. As I mentioned before, the viaduct between Flinders and Spencer Street stations was first built in 1891 with a single track. Over the years, it expanded and changed a lot as demand increased and the city around it changed. If you want more details on these viaducts, by the way, make sure that you check out Tate Set's fantastic video on the topic that I've linked up here in the top right-hand corner. While the viaduct was very successful and continues in heavy use today, it does cement Melbourne's hub and spoke rail network, where almost all trains have to go through both major stations. This has continued even after the City Loop was built in 1981. Not only does this create a single point of failure in the network, but it also means that trips take much longer for anyone who wants to travel between places outside the CBD. Planners foresaw these problems as far back as the 1860s, and one solution that was commonly brought up to fix this was to build a new railway directly over the Yarra River next to the CBD. The first real attempt to do this was in 1913. This was when the first stages of planning work started to build a new road bridge carrying Spencer Street over the Yarra River. At the time, the Victorian Railways, whose office was just up the road, requested that a double-track electric rail bridge be built into the design. They did this again in 1922 when the bridge was authorised for construction. The main reason for this was to service some new goods sheds on the south side of the river in Port Melbourne, but it would have also freed up space for passenger services at Flinders Street Station as well. This was because part of the plan was to redirect trains on the Port Melbourne and St Kilda lines to terminate at Spencer Street Station instead of Flinders Street. So after the bridge was authorised, the state government held a design competition in 1925, which was won by a team made up of Edward Saunders, Alan Wilson, Alfred LaGuerche and William Gower. All seemed well until someone asked the architects if they had spoken to Victorian Railways at any point during the process, and funnily enough, they hadn't. So when the Victorian Railways were told about the new design, which didn't include any rail infrastructure at all, they were furious. They of course insisted that their long-standing plans for a railway here be brought into the project, and refused to give their support for the bridge to be built without it. Quite probably exasperated by their intransigence and wanting to build the bridge as soon as possible to fulfil political promises, the Public Works Department called their bluff and said that a railway would be included, but on the condition that the railway construction branch would be given the task of building it with their own funds and labour. And so a second design was prepared by the Victorian Railways together with the original architects. While they had originally proposed that the railway be built directly above the road on a second bridge, the design was changed to instead build the second bridge alongside it. When construction started in 1927, the proposed rail bridge was still included in the plan. In fact, this is one of the reasons why the bridge is so low compared to some of the others across the Yarra. This was to ensure that there was enough clearance between it and the proposed higher rail bridge on the west side, which had to be higher so that it aligned with the height of the Flinders Street viaduct. The bridge was officially opened on the 12th of February 1930, although only the road bridge. This is because the rail bridge wasn't built at the time. I can't find exactly why, but it was kind of built many years later, eventually, which we'll talk about in a bit. Ironically, the new bridge was still built by the Victorian Railways, even though it never ended up including a railway at all. And despite being hit by a Tasmanian steamer in 1932, the bridge remains with us to this day. On a related note, although it was a road bridge, it was always planned with provision for trams. And not too long after the bridge opened, tram tracks were built as part of a new route to Clarendon Street, approved by the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board in 1936. At the same time, Melbourne City Council brought forward a fresh proposal in 1932 to actually remove the diagonal Sandridge rail bridge just east of Queensbridge and replace it with a straighter one just east of Spencer Street. I digress, but I do think this is very interesting, and at least tangentially related to this video. Anyway, in the post-war period after 1945, Melbourne was growing rapidly with demand for the transport of passengers and goods everywhere. This included Fisherman's Bend, which was then, as it is now, the focus of a lot of planning attention. The Victorian Railways recognised this and decided to have another go at creating a new railway to free up the Flinders Street Viaduct. Their proposal was to create a brand new railway line, mainly by connecting bits and pieces of the existing network. The full plan was unveiled to the public for the first time in the 1954 Melbourne Metropolitan Planning Scheme. This new line, with the working name of North-South Rail Link, would join the Whittlesea and Hurstbridge lines along the Inner Circle Railway via Royal Park, down to the St Kilda and Port Melbourne lines at Port Junction just west of Clarendon Street in South Melbourne. There was surprisingly little new infrastructure for such a transformational change. All that this would require was a short section of new track and bridge over the Yarra River just west of Spencer Street, as we talked about earlier with the road bridge. An optional second section would be some new track to allow city-bound Hurstbridge trains to turn west on the Inner Circle line over Merry Creek in Westgarth. This second part was optional because the Board of Works recognised that the land needed to build this connection had not yet been reserved. They also noted that several existing buildings would need to be demolished, and the existing junction would need to be completely rebuilt. The second option, if this extra bit wasn't built, would have likely been for only Whittlesea trains to use this new connection, and possibly even upfield services as well. If this happened, then I think the North-South Rail Link could have worked perfectly fine. The curve needed to take trains coming from Whittlesea already existed, and no new track would be required. If built, the North-South Rail Link would have allowed trains to run directly from the northeastern suburbs via Spencer Street Station and all the way down to South Melbourne, St Kilda and Port Melbourne. This was seen as very useful at the time, not only for passenger traffic, but also to allow goods traffic from a proposed new network of track at Fisherman's Bend to cater for industrial and maritime demand. Of course, none of this was ever built. Or was it? In 1986, the Webb Dock line was built connecting to the large container port at Webb Dock, funnily enough. This finally realised the original plans for the 1930 Spencer Street Bridge 56 years later. It allowed goods trains to access the area directly, but it only operated for 6 years. While the line was built in a different place to the proposed new bridge and track from 1930, it arguably played a similar role by connecting port facilities to the wider rail network near Spencer Street. If the enabling infrastructure was built as originally planned and services operated as intended, I think there's a decent chance that the North-South Rail Link would still be operating today. It may have even saved the St Kilda and Port Melbourne lines from being closed and converted to light rail, because it would have provided a connection that did not go through the Crown Casino and Exhibition Centre redevelopment. It would have also likely kept the Inner Circle line open, at the very least for passenger service a lot longer than it actually did. This arrangement would have also reduced congestion through the City Loop and Flinders Street. One of the main justifications in the modern day for the Metro Tunnel has been to free up space in the loop to improve reliability and increase the frequency of services. If the North-South Rail Link was still operating, then it would move at least one and possibly two entire lines out of the central city and free up a lot of space. We can then speculate on how this would have impacted the wider network, and then we start to enter Gunzel fantasy territory, but I do want to share my theory on that at the very least. Had this been in place when the City Loop was built, then I think the tunnel portal arrangements may have been different. Perhaps only 3 or even 2 tunnels would have been built, severely restricting its future capacity. Or Hurstbridge line trains may have shared the Clifton Hill Loop tunnels with other lines. This is pure speculation on my part, of course. What do you think would have happened if the North-South Rail Link was built? Let me know in the comments below if you have any ideas, which I know a lot of you will. One final fun fact for you. When the St Kilda and Port Melbourne lines were converted from heavy to light rail, this project was also officially called the North-South Link, an accidental or deliberate nod to the past. So that's the story of the North-South Rail Link that never was. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe so that you can stay up to date on future videos and continue to support this channel. Every little bit helps. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.